The man stepped into the store, adjusting the cap on his head. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull glow over the room. He had seen countless reports, read hundreds of complaints, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to witness firsthand. He had built this company from the ground up. Yet, standing here, disguised as just another new hire, he felt like an outsider in his own empire. "Move it. I don't have all day." A sharp voice cut through the air. He turned just in time to see an older worker struggling to carry a heavy box to the back. His arms trembled under the weight, sweat forming at his brow. Instead of offering help, the manager stood there, arms crossed, watching. "Pathetic," the manager scoffed. "This is why you people never make it anywhere in life." The CEO's stomach tightened. He had expected strict leadership. What he found was something worse: humiliation. No one dared to speak up. Employees walked past the struggling worker, heads down, pretending not to notice. Fear clung to them like a second skin. The CEO gritted his teeth. Was this what his company had become? He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay in character. He was not the CEO right now. He was a desperate man looking for a job, just like everyone else here. "Hey, what's the holdup?" The manager turned his attention to him. His sharp eyes scanned him from head to toe, judging him within seconds. "You're the new guy, huh?" The CEO nodded. The manager smirked. "Perfect. We needed someone to handle all the trash." Laughter erupted from the nearby employees, not out of amusement, but out of fear. They had learned to laugh at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. "Come on, newbie," the manager sneered, shoving a mop into his hands. "Let's see if you're good for something." The CEO took the mop without protest. He wasn't here to prove his pride, he was here to uncover the truth. As he dipped the mop into the dirty water, he noticed something else. The cash register. A worker was ringing up a customer, but the moment she handed over the cash, the manager snatched the bills from the drawer and stuffed them into his pocket. The CEO's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just about power. Something far worse was going on here. And he was going to find out exactly what it was. The CEO, still disguised as a low-level worker, tightened his grip on the mop. The air inside the store felt heavy, not because of the heat, but because of the fear that lingered in every corner. Employees moved like ghosts, careful not to attract attention. He had built this company to provide opportunities, but here, under this manager's rule, it had become a prison. "Hey! Mop faster, rookie. Or do I need to spell it out for you?" The manager's voice cut through the room. The CEO didn't react. He had to play along. Nearby, the same old worker from earlier stood at the register, nervously counting bills. The CEO watched closely. Would the manager steal from the drawer again? Just then, a young woman rushed in from the storage room, breathless. "Sir, we're out of cleaning supplies. Should I?" Before she could finish, the manager snapped, "Did I ask for your opinion? If you had time to run your mouth, you had time to check before it ran out. You're lucky I don't dock your pay for this." She flinched, murmured an apology, and hurried away. The CEO clenched his jaw. Was this how they treated employees? Like disposable tools? The hours dragged on. He saw workers scolded for no reason, customers ignored, and employees too afraid to even take breaks. He also noticed something odd. Every few hours, the manager would take the cash from the register and disappear into his office. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, the CEO found himself in the break room. It was small and cramped, with only a few plastic chairs. Workers sat in silence, eating quickly, as if they weren't allowed to relax. He sat down next to the young woman from earlier. She hesitated before whispering, "You should leave while you can." The CEO raised an eyebrow. Why? She glanced at the security camera in the corner and lowered her voice. The manager, if he doesn't like you, you're gone. He's fired so many good people. Some don't even get their final paychecks. Has no one reported him? She gave a bitter smile. Who do we report to? The regional office doesn't care. Every time someone complains, they disappear. We don't know if they're fired or just forced to leave. The CEO's stomach turned. He had received hundreds of complaints, but never imagined it was this bad. Just then, the break room door burst open. The manager stood there, arms crossed, eyes filled with suspicion. Break time's over. Get back to work. Now. The employees scrambled up, hurrying out. The CEO remained still. He wasn't just dealing with a bad manager. This was something much bigger. And he was going to end it. The CEO tightened his fists but kept his face neutral as he walked out of the break room. The manager's eyes followed him, sharp and calculating. Had he overheard their conversation? The CEO knew he had to be careful. One wrong move, and he'd be thrown out before uncovering the full truth. As he walked past the cashier, he noticed her trembling hands while handling money. She was clearly terrified of making a mistake. The manager loomed over her shoulder, eyes narrowing at the register. Count it again, he snapped. The cashier swallowed hard and recounted. The CEO watched carefully. She was right, something was off with the numbers. But it wasn't her fault. The missing cash wasn't from mistakes, it was stolen. A sudden crash echoed from the back of the store. The CEO turned in time to see a worker drop a heavy crate. The box had burst open, spilling canned goods across the floor. The manager exploded. "You useless idiot," he bellowed, marching toward the young man. "Do you know how much this costs? Do you even understand numbers, or is that too hard for your tiny brain?" The worker frantically tried to pick up the cans, his face red with embarrassment. The CEO felt his pulse rise. Enough. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. It was just an accident. The room went silent. The manager turned to him slowly, his face darkening. "Excuse me?" "You don't have to humiliate him," the CEO said calmly, gripping the mop handle. "Accidents happen. He's already cleaning it up." A few employees glanced up, their eyes wide. No one had ever stood up to the manager before. For a moment, the manager simply stared at him. Then, he chuckled. "Oh, we have a hero, huh? I should have known you'd be a problem." The CEO didn't reply. The manager took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, rookie. I run this store, and I don't tolerate troublemakers. If you want to keep your job, keep your mouth shut and do what you're told." The CEO met his gaze without flinching. "Understood." The manager smirked, satisfied with what he thought was obedience. He turned his attention back to the young worker, barking another order. But the CEO had already made up his mind. This was more than just mistreatment. Something much bigger was happening. That night, while employees locked up and the manager counted cash in his office, the CEO lingered in the storage area. He needed proof. And when he peeked inside the manager's office through a small crack in the door, he finally saw it, the manager stuffing wads of cash into an unmarked envelope. The CEO's heart pounded. This was it. The evidence he needed. But before he could move, a voice spoke behind him. "What are you doing here?" He turned around, and froze. Someone had caught him. And now, everything was at risk. The CEO's heart pounded as he turned to face the person who had caught him snooping. It was one of the employees, a young man with wary eyes, standing in the dimly lit storage room. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he crossed his arms that put the CEO on edge. "What are you doing back here?" the young man asked, his voice low. The CEO knew he had to think fast. "Just checking inventory." Manager said the supplies were running low. The young man didn't respond immediately. His gaze flicked toward the manager's office, where the faint rustling of cash could still be heard. Then, after a long pause, he sighed. "You shouldn't get involved. Just keep your head down and do your job." The CEO narrowed his eyes. Did this employee know what was happening? Before he could ask, the young man turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the dimly lit hallway. Something felt off. The CEO waited a moment before glancing back into the office. The manager was now sealing the unmarked envelope, his fingers moving quickly. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. The CEO strained to listen. "Yeah, I have it. Same drop-off location?" A pause. "No, no problems. Just some nosy new guy, but I'll handle it." The CEO's stomach dropped. He was talking about him. The realization sent a jolt through him. This wasn't just workplace bullying. The manager was stealing company money and delivering it somewhere. But to whom? He needed more information. But before he could retreat, the manager's chair scraped against the floor. The CEO barely had time to step back before the office door swung open. The manager stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing. "What are you still doing here?" For a split second, the CEO considered lying. But he had to play it smart. "I was checking the back for more supplies," he said, keeping his voice casual. The manager studied him. His sharp gaze lingered for a second too long. Then, he smirked. "You sure you're not just being nosy?" The CEO forced a small laugh. "Nosy? Man, I'm just here for a paycheck." The manager's smirk widened. "Good. Because I don't tolerate rats." The CEO held his gaze. Then, the manager clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Be here early tomorrow. I might have a special job for you." Something about his tone made the CEO's skin crawl. As he walked away, he glanced toward the break room, where the employees sat, exhausted and silent. The corruption went deeper than he thought. And the worst part? Someone among them was working for the manager. Someone knew who he really was. And now, he was in danger. The CEO barely slept that night. Lying on the stiff cot in his small apartment, one he had rented to maintain his cover, his mind raced. The manager was stealing money. But for who? And worse, someone in the store knew he wasn't just another worker. He had to move carefully. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual. The store wasn't open yet, but the manager was already there, standing by the back door with a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Good," the manager said, motioning him over. "I've got a job for you." The CEO kept his expression neutral. "What kind of job?" The manager smirked and tossed him a set of keys. "Drive this bag to the address inside. Don't ask questions. Just do it, and I'll make sure you're rewarded." The CEO glanced at the bag, pretending to hesitate. "That's a lot of trust for a new guy." The manager's smirk darkened. "Let's just say I have a good sense about people. You do this right, and you'll be taken care of. You screw it up." He let the words hang in the air. A test. The CEO had no choice. He took the bag, nodded, and walked toward the back exit. As soon as he stepped outside, his mind went into overdrive. This was the break he needed. He tossed the bag into the passenger seat of an old store vehicle and climbed in. His hands tightened around the wheel. He could drive straight to the drop-off, or he could take a detour. He made his choice. 15 minutes later, he pulled into an empty parking lot and unzipped the duffel bag. Inside was exactly what he expected, stacks of stolen cash. But there was more. Tucked beneath the money was a list of names. He scanned it quickly. Some names were familiar, employees who had disappeared. Others he didn't recognize. And then, at the bottom, a name that made his stomach drop. A senior executive. Someone high up in the company was involved. Before he could process it fully, his phone buzzed. It was a text, from an unknown number. "Nice detour. Thought you weren't the nosy type?" The CEO's heart slammed in his chest. Someone was watching him. He glanced around. Nothing. No cars, no people. Then, another message. "Better get back on the road. Before it's too late." A cold wave washed over him. This wasn't just about money anymore. He wasn't just exposing corruption. He was playing a dangerous game. And now, they knew. The CEO gripped the steering wheel, his pulse hammering. Someone was watching him. The unknown message wasn't a warning, it was a threat. He had two options. Drive to the address and complete the drop-off. Take the evidence straight to corporate and expose the corruption. But he knew the second option was dangerous. There was a senior executive involved. What if corporate was already compromised? He had to be smart. He turned the key in the ignition, forcing himself to stay calm. He'd play along, for now. 30 minutes later, he pulled up to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, but two men stood near the entrance, their faces hidden beneath dark caps. As he stepped out, one of them approached. "You got the package?" The CEO nodded, keeping his voice neutral. "Manager told me to deliver it." The man reached for the duffel bag, but the CEO hesitated. "Can I ask something?" The man's posture stiffened. "You're not here to ask questions." The CEO forced a casual shrug. "Just curious. That guy runs the store like a prison. You all work for him, or does he work for someone else?" The man smirked. "You ask too many questions, rookie." Before the CEO could react, the man snatched the bag and stepped back. The second man opened the warehouse door, and without another word, they disappeared inside. The CEO clenched his fists. He needed more. More proof. More names. But he also knew he was running out of time. Back at the store, the atmosphere was different. Employees stole nervous glances at him. Whispers trailed behind his back. They knew. Someone had told them. As he walked toward the stockroom, the young employee who had warned him before stepped in front of him. "You should leave," he whispered urgently. "You don't understand what you're up against." The CEO met his gaze. "Then tell me." The young man looked around, lowering his voice. "The manager isn't the problem. He's just the middleman. The real power? It's someone higher up." "Who?" the CEO pressed. Before he could answer, the store intercom crackled. "New guy, to the office. Now." The manager's voice. The employee paled. "You need to go. Now." The CEO squared his shoulders. "No. It was time to end this." He walked toward the manager's office, his heartbeat steady. He wasn't afraid anymore. Because soon, they'd all know exactly who he was. The CEO stepped into the manager's office, shutting the door behind him. The man sat behind his desk, arms crossed, his smirk as sharp as ever. "Close the blinds," the manager ordered. The CEO didn't move. "Why?" The smirk faded. "Because I told you to." The tension in the room was thick. The CEO knew he was walking into a trap, but he also knew something the manager didn't. He was the one in control now. "Sit," the manager said, motioning to the chair across from him. The CEO took his time, settling in. He could see the duffel bag now sitting behind the manager's desk, placed carefully against the wall. The money was gone. "Good job today," the manager said smoothly. "Not bad for a rookie." The CEO didn't respond. The manager leaned forward. "But here's the thing, you've been asking too many questions." His voice dropped lower. "I don't like that." Silence stretched between them. Then, the CEO spoke. "You're stealing from the company." The manager's face didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. "You're laundering money," the CEO continued. "Skimming from the registers. For months, maybe years. You fire people who get too close, and anyone who complains disappears." He tilted his head. "Did I miss anything?" The manager chuckled. "You talk like you have proof." The CEO smirked. He did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, turning the screen toward the manager. A recording was already playing. The manager's own voice filled the room. "Yeah, I have it." "Same drop-off location?" The color drained from the man's face. The CEO tapped the screen. "That's you, isn't it?" The manager shot to his feet. "Where did you get that?" "I could ask you the same thing about the money," the CEO replied calmly. "But let's skip that part. Let's talk about your boss." The manager's fists clenched. "Because we both know you're not smart enough to pull this off alone," the CEO continued. "So who's helping you? Who's covering for you?" The manager's nostrils flared. "You think you're clever, don't you?" The CEO smiled. "I know I am." Before the manager could respond, the door swung open. Two security officers walked in, followed by a man in a suit. "Corporate." The manager went pale. "We received a direct report of misconduct," the corporate officer said, glancing between them. "And financial fraud." The CEO leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "I wonder who could have sent that." The manager's breathing turned ragged. He knew. It was over. But then. He lunged for the duffel bag. In one swift move, he grabbed the bag and shoved past the guards, bolting toward the back exit. The CEO shot up. He was running. Security chased after him, but the CEO didn't wait. He sprinted forward, pushing through the store. Employees froze, eyes wide, as the truth unfolded before them. The powerful manager, the man who ruled with fear, was running like a coward. And then, just as he reached the back door, security tackled him to the ground. The duffel bag spilled open. Stacks of cash scattered across the floor. Silence. Then, a single voice broke through. "He's been stealing from us this whole time." Murmurs turned into gasps. Whispers turned into shouts. Everything the employees had suffered under his rule, now they knew why. The manager thrashed under the guard's grip. "You don't understand. I had no choice." The CEO stepped forward, towering over him. "Then why don't you tell us who gave you the orders?" The manager's lips parted, then hesitated. His eyes darted toward the corporate officer, then to the employees, then back to the CEO. He was scared. And that meant only one thing. Someone bigger was still out there. The manager lay pinned beneath the guards, his face twisted in frustration. Employees gathered, whispering among themselves. Some looked angry, others relieved. For years, they had suffered under his rule. Now, they finally knew the truth. But the CEO wasn't satisfied. This man wasn't the mastermind. He crouched down, meeting the manager's panicked gaze. "Who gave you the orders?" The manager clenched his jaw, refusing to answer. The CEO's voice dropped lower. You really think protecting them is worth going to prison? The manager's eyes flickered with fear. His hands trembled. He opened his mouth. Then, a voice from the entrance stopped everything. Let him go. Everyone turned. A man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped into the store, his expression calm but his eyes deadly. He walked with authority, each step controlled and measured. The CEO's stomach tightened. He recognized him. A senior executive. The one who had been protecting the manager. The executive sighed, shaking his head. This is disappointing. His gaze landed on the manager, who was still restrained on the floor. I gave you everything. Power. Control. And you let it slip through your fingers. The manager swallowed hard. Sir, I. The executive raised a hand, silencing him. Then, he turned his attention to the CEO. And you just couldn't leave it alone, could you? The CEO held his gaze. Corruption doesn't belong in my company. The executive's lips twitched into a small smirk. Your company? For a moment, there was silence. Then, the executive chuckled. He knew. He knew who the CEO really was. The CEO remained still, but his mind raced. How long had this man known? Since the beginning? Since the moment he stepped into the store? The executive stepped forward, his voice smooth. You think you're a hero, don't you? Cleaning up the mess. Saving the little people. He tilted his head. But you forget something. You built this company. And I made sure it ran exactly how you wanted. The CEO's jaw tightened. I never wanted this. No? The executive raised an eyebrow. Then why did you ignore all the complaints? The reports? The warnings? You let this happen. The word struck deep, but the CEO didn't flinch. Because deep down, he knew, this man was right. He had been so far removed from the day-to-day operations that he had let monsters like this take control. The executive sighed. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. You've made too much noise. He turned to the corporate officer. We'll take care of this internally. The CEO stepped forward. No, we won't. The executive's eyes darkened. This isn't getting buried, the CEO said firmly. You're done. The executive laughed. You have no proof against me. The CEO smirked. I do. He pulled out his phone. A live recording was playing. The executive's face paled. This entire conversation, the CEO said, has been sent to corporate. And the authorities. The executive stiffened. The employees around them murmured, realization dawning on their faces. The CEO leaned in. You thought I was just another worker. His voice was steady, controlled. But you forgot one thing. I built this company. And today, I'm taking it back. The executive's smirk vanished. Outside, sirens wailed. The authorities had arrived. And for the first time, the powerful executive looked afraid. The executive's confident smirk had completely disappeared. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and the reality of the situation finally sank in. This was over. The manager, still pinned to the ground, thrashed desperately. Sir, do something. We can fix this. But the executive didn't respond. His cold demeanor cracked as the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders. There was no fixing this. The doors swung open, and uniformed officers stormed in. Step away from him, one of them ordered. The guards released the manager, who immediately tried to scramble up, but the officers grabbed him before he could make a run for it. You're under arrest for financial fraud, labor violations, and misconduct, one officer announced, securing him in handcuffs. The employees watched, silent, but victorious. Then, the officers turned to the executive. "And you?" The executive straightened his suit, still trying to maintain his air of superiority. "I have nothing to do with this." The CEO took a step forward, his voice unwavering. "That recording says otherwise." For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed the executive's face. "I'll have my lawyers handle this," he said stiffly. The officer wasn't impressed. "You can explain everything at the station." The executive was escorted out in handcuffs. As he passed the CEO, he muttered under his breath, "You think you've won?" The CEO met his glare. "I don't think, I know." The executive was led out of the store, past the employees who had once lived in fear of his power. Now, they stood tall, unafraid. The moment the doors shut behind him, the store erupted into cheers. Justice had finally been served. The aftermath. A few days later, the CEO stood in the store, his store. The toxic manager was gone. The corrupt executive was facing charges. The employees, once silent and afraid, now laughed, talked, and worked without fear. But the CEO knew this wasn't just about fixing one store. This was a wake-up call. He had spent years at the top, far removed from the struggles of the workers below him. He had built this empire, but he had also let monsters take control. That would never happen again. He walked through the aisles, nodding to employees, listening to their concerns, being present. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to lead. Before leaving, he turned to address the employees. "From now on, this company will be run differently. No more fear. No more corruption. Every voice will be heard." A young woman smiled. "It's about time." The CEO nodded. "It is." As he stepped out into the fresh air, he took a deep breath. Leadership wasn't about sitting in an office. It was about standing with the people who built the company with him. And this? This was only the beginning. Final life lesson. Sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to see it from the bottom up. True leadership isn't about power, it's about accountability, trust, and standing up for what's right.